I'm Shahar Azani, and welcome to this episode of Eye on Israel, exploring the fight for Israel in the public sphere through education. The rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, one and the same, has been evident in recent years, and the need to push back against such hatred and propaganda has become imperative. My guest today is Laureen Lipsky, CEO and founder of one such endeavor, Taking Back the Narrative, a Zionism education initiative geared toward both Jews and non-Jews. Her Israel and Jewish-oriented op-ed writings have been featured in various media outlets, among them The Federalist, American Thinker, and JNS. She has also written an exclusive piece, The Semantics of Anti-Semitism, for the Center for Security Policy. Laureen, welcome to JBS. Such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is such an honor.
I first want to ask you about you, Laureen. You know, whenever we see such activity, such action, such, dynamics, it always makes us wonder, and our viewers would love to know, what brought you to where you are today?
So what truly brought me to this point is myself being anti-Semitic, being a self-hating Jew, and it's still today hard to admit that.
You were.
Absolutely.
What does that mean? What does that mean that this is what you were? Tell us a little bit.
I grew up in a fairly Zionist home. My parents immigrated from Belarus, part of the first wave of Soviet Jewry. But my parents, coming from a communist country, they did not grow up with any sort of faith. They knew that they were Jewish ethnically. On their passports, very much boldly said J for Jew, but that was meant to be in a more anti-Semitic fashion.
Right.
And so when they came to America, they were busy building a new life, and they didn't really have the background to explore the faith side of Judaism, and nor did they have, honestly, the time. And so I remember my grandparents would come over to our home for fancy dinners, as they are called. But I had no idea that it was called Passover or Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, wow.
Or Hanukkah. And so I did not know that I was a Jew until about 7 years old. And the way I found out was actually quite interesting. I was watching I'm going to date myself. I was watching a show called Lassie. And the main character was a blonde Christian boy who before bed would pray to Jesus. Being an impressionable child, I did the same for a couple of weeks. One night, my father was passing my bedroom. He saw me on my knees crossing myself, and he stopped and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, Dad, I'm praying to Jesus before bed," because in my mind, that's what all kids in America did. So he sat me down. He said, "We're Jewish. You can't do this." And so this was around 7, 8 years old. And
Wow.
I was fascinated that I was Jewish. So I did a lot of research, or as much research as one can when they're 8, 9 years old at that point. And I was begging to attend Hebrew school like my Jewish friends. But my parents, coming from a communist country and politically being a little bit more inclined and involved, they did not quite agree with the politics of our local rabbi. And having grown up in a small town, there were not many choices in terms of synagogues. There was one synagogue. And so he said, "No, we're not sending you to this Hebrew school." So this was around 7, 8, 9 years old. So I'm getting a little bit older. My friends are years later gearing up for their bar and bat mitzvahs. So again, at this point, I'm babysitting, and I'm offering babysitting money to contribute to a Hebrew tutor, anything to have a bar and bat mitzvah. So my parents said, "Okay, we'll do you one better. Your first international trip will be to Israel. We're going to quote unquote rent a rabbi," as if renting a pair of shoes, and also a tour guide, one and the same. Somehow they found a man who was both a rabbi and a tour guide. And that was it. My transliterated bat mitzvah, my transliterated Haftarah portion was on top of the Masada. And I remember the rabbi...
Wait, you pushed for it, Laureen, even though you grew up in a family that was not observant at all.
No. And I think I pushed for it, first of all, the juxtaposition and the extreme going from thinking I'm not Jewish to finding out I'm a Jew.
Right.
That was shocking in a great way. And also, I had some Jewish friends. I attended public school, and everyone in my community, whether they were Jewish or Catholic, attended some kind of after school parochial program. And as a teenager, you want to be like-minded, just like everyone else. But something within me knew that Israel was special at that time. And I remember in that ceremony on top of the Masada, the rabbi mentioned something about Anne Frank, just because age-related, we had just started learning about the Holocaust. And I remember paying more attention to what the rabbi had previously said about the Judean warriors and the last stand on top of the Masada, being more interested in that than anything he had said about Anne Frank. So the trip was amazing. I knew that Israel was special. I just did not understand at that time exactly why. I didn't know how to quantify it, how to explain it to myself. So this was 13 years old. And
that was your first time in Israel?
My first time in Israel. And it would be my last time for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And so from 14 until almost 32 years old, I read the New York Times. I watched CNN. A little bit later, when I was in college, I was reading The Economist regularly, and I absorbed the anti-Israel narrative because, to me, the New York Times was like the Bible. If the New York Times prints it, it has to be true. If CNN says it, it has to be the truth. Same thing with The Economist. At the time, I thought all three. And so the reason I said that I was anti-Semitic, again, still hard for me to admit that, because a lot of my friends were non-Jewish. And so whenever Israel would be in the news, they would turn to me and they would say, "Oh, so can you explain a little bit more? Because I know that you're Jewish."
Right.
And so I repeated the lies that I was reading, that I was hearing. And
did you believe those lies?
Absolutely. I believe that there was a Palestine. I believe that they were Palestinians. I believed that there were settlements instead of legal Jewish communities. And the crescendo of my anti-Semitic sentiment towards Israel was when Natan Sharansky came to speak in 2013. And growing up, he was always considered in my family and of course, throughout the Jewish world, to be the Jewish hero of our people, as he is. But I went because to the event, I remember he was speaking at Temple Emmanuel, a couple blocks away from my apartment. I attended the event because I wanted to confront him. Confront him. Not personally, but in the Q&A session, because I had heard he was quote unquote defending, the settlements, and I wanted to understand why Israel was blocking peace. That's what I truly thought. So I sat through his speech, and of course, I was impressed by a lot of other things that he said about Jewish identity, Jewish continuity. And in the Q&A session, when it finally came along, I raised my hand so high and so proud. The only reason I was spared embarrassment, because there was another Jew who was as ignorant as I was. He asked the question I was dying to ask. Which was, why is Israel building settlements? It isn't the only obstacle to peace. He asked that question. And I remember Natan Sharansky answered back truthfully. And he said, there's no such thing as settlements. Those are legal Jewish communities. I left that event in disgust. And I thought, oh, here is Sharansky. He's just another Hasbara, piece, here from Israel. How dare he? And so this was 2013. 2014 was the first Hamas war. And I had a complete 180 because on CNN, I saw that they were giving Hamas officials all the airtime and no airtime to anyone from Israel. So even though I was anti-Israel, but I was not extreme. And so I understood that there should be some fairness to both sides, as they say. And so something didn't sit well with me, and I wanted
That was the moment when you started growing suspicious.
Absolutely. And what furthered that suspicion, I was on Facebook, and this is so crazy to say right now because I have a lot of Israeli friends, both online and of course in person. But at the time, I had maybe three Israeli contacts. I wouldn't even call them friends, at that in that period, only on Facebook. And I remember this one woman posted videos in her backyard, and what she was posting was very different from what I was seeing on CNN. And so that also made me want to research the truth. And so I joined a lot of Facebook. At the time, they were called secret Zionist groups. And anything I could learn about the history of Israel, about the history of the Middle East, I would share with my audience. And it was maybe once a week, a little tidbit of historical information. And that grew to once a day. That grew into short form posts, into long form posts. And finally, in 2019, I wrote my first op-ed. And it was called, "If My Great Uncle Was a Palestinian Jew, Then Who Are You, Rashida Tlaib?" And that article went viral on the Times of Israel platform.
Wow. Let me ask you, where is your family throughout this awakening process?
It depends on the family. So growing up, just to add a little bit, I did have my paternal grandmother did live in Netanya. So, but the connection to Israel, despite that, was still not strong. I remember being worried about Israel when there would be wars. And of course, I would just worry about people's safety, but I never really cared to find out the truth. And every year I did see that my parents would make a donation to AFMDA, the American Friends of Magen David Adom, but that's it. When I became a vocal Zionist, a proud Zionist, my parents were very supportive just because they were Zionists themselves. And I also found out that my father, during medical school in Russia, started an underground Zionist club. And the club got raided by the KGB. And the only reason he was not arrested while the rest of the members were was because he was attending a funeral of a family member. So both of my parents were very supportive. Unfortunately, other members of my family were not as supportive. They didn't want me to go public. They were afraid what their own networks would think just because my name is now out there.
Right. So we have the op-ed now. Mm-hmm. And when do you move from, expressing your views to launching a whole initiative? How does that process work?
It took about 30 op-eds. And so in the process
30. Wow.
So it took about 30 op-eds for me to feel even confident in the space that I know my own history. I know what I'm talking about. And so when writing op-eds, one has to research facts and information. And it was a journey. I did not just want to post and copy and paste. Another thing that also bothered me at the time, I joined a lot of Jewish organizations, very well-known Jewish organizations. And I still was a little bit bothered why they were saying incorrect terminology. I heard Palestinians, I heard Palestine, I heard the term West Bank. And so to me, having those Jewish organizations say that incorrect terminology, it confused me. I was thinking, why are they repeating inaccurate terms, reinforcing the very anti-Semitism that they want to work against? And so that is also what prompted me to start my own initiative, because I didn't see anyone else in the space.
You wanted more clarity, but to be honest, when you think about those terms, these specific terms are used by Israeli officials many times. So we're talking about.
It's not helpful.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, if we want to dive into the core of your work, which is enlightening public discourse with knowledge and education, whereas there is a lot of ignorance about the basic facts. You're talking about advanced discussions. Some people out there have no idea what Israel is and what Jewish is, and they confuse terms, like you said, for them the entirety of Israel is a settlement. Before I dive into taking back the narrative, just one quick question that really I'm very much curious about. You usually have, social circle. How did your friends react to this change?
I lost 90% of my friends
Wow.
at the time. But
You did.
that's okay.
Yeah.
I did. And that's fine because I made better friends. And if a friend cannot support the truth, then they're no friend to begin with. And I'm sure everyone who's listening in and watching who is being vocal about politics or even Zionism, they probably have lost people in their lives too. And it's
Right.
painful, but I would rather promote the truth.
Right.
So what I also noticed in the space that was missing is that a lot of organizations, and all the organizations have their purpose and their space,
Right.
but I noticed that most organizations will mention biblical times, ancient times, and would jump to 1948. And so what was missing for me, so what I wanted to do was to teach others how I finally learned about Zionism.
Or continue Jewish presence in the Holy Land.
Exactly. So that was the
That's,
thing.
by the way, one of the most important points that you're just making now. And I think that for the sake of our viewers, maybe take a minute and say something about that, because this is one of the, well, like you say, it's many a time it's a missing link.
Absolutely. So to me, when I was younger and not a Zionist, another popular lie was that all the Jews left, that there was that exile, all the Jews left, and only came back as victims of the Holocaust in the 1940s.
Right.
I believe that. And so what do a lot of anti-Semites say? So all the Jews left, Arabs came in, and then Jews ended up stealing their
Right.
land. And it's very plausible when no one knows the middle part. So that's what I wanted to fill in.
And the middle part is of great
2,000 years.
great importance. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
I want to, just to make sure we have enough time, I want you to talk a little bit about taking back the narrative. We spoke about the op-eds, now you have this initiative. What does it include?
So the mission is threefold. And like you mentioned, it's to prove the continuous presence of Jews in the land of Israel, that we are indigenous to the land. And so that's why it's very important to know that there was rich Jewish history in the Middle Ages. There were aliyahs, not just Ashkenaz aliyahs. There were Mizrahi aliyahs.
Right.
How many of us know that there was a Kurdish aliyah? The first Kurdish aliyah occurred in the late 1600s. The Yemeni aliyah, the first one being in the 1800s.
Correct.
The Sephardim held down the fort for hundreds of years. Ladino was the lingua franca of Israel at the time. The Battle of Haifa in 1100, where Jews and Muslims, but later they found out it was mostly Jews, held back the Crusaders for almost a month. That story, that history is fascinating, and that's our history. How many know about the rich Jewish history in Gaza? Jews lived in Gaza for thousands of years and contributed. So that to me is very important. So that's one prong. The other one is to use correct terminology, that it's, for example, not West Bank, which is a 1950s occupation term. It is very much Judea and Samaria. It's not settlements. Those are legal Jewish communities. When we talk about Palestinians, which of the 7 groups are they talking about? And to emphasize that Palestinians was invented by the KGB in an anti-Semitic propaganda campaign in 1967. When we talk about Palestine, Palestine's a term that was meant to remove the Jewish connection from Judea when the Romans finally conquered. And the only reason that they renamed the land, it took more men and money to conquer Jews than anyone else. They were sending reserves from England to fight Jews. It took 3 wars for them. And so when we talk about Palestine, we're talking about the region of Palestine, right? Because what we have Israel today as a sovereign, that's 22% of the land. 78% was unfortunately stolen by the British and had created Transjordan in 1922, had reneged their commitment to Jews and their promise that was signed off in a legal fashion by 51 member states of the League of Nations in 1920, part of the San Remo Accords.
So talk about, you talked about the mission. Let's talk about the activities, the day-to-day activities that you're taking in your educational efforts.
Absolutely. So a large part of it is social media. It's par for the course for any initiative. So, we post on LinkedIn, which has a broad appeal, broad reach. On Instagram, we can be found at TBTN Israel. Facebook, unfortunately, shadow bans. So I use that more as a personal vehicle, just reposting. But an activity that we just launched that has been successful, that will be repeated, is a proprietary class that I teach called Israel Explained through the lens of history. And it's a 6-week class. And we cover everything from who are Jews, what are Jews, right, the origination of Jews, ancient Jewish history, the Middle Ages, Ottoman occupation, British occupation, Jordanian occupation, right, talking about the Jewish resistance groups, talking about the Bedouins who have been helping Israel throughout the ages, talking about the minorities, because anyone can turn on the news, can read articles about minority anti-Semitism activities against the majority Jews. But I do want to be positive because I do strongly believe that all the minorities in Israel do contribute positively to the society.
I agree. I think positivity is one of the most important engines we can use in our discussion, but so is history, by the way. And that's why to be able to share facts with people about history undermines the very claim of our adversaries who want to see us as nothing more but colonial settlers, right? That's what CUNY does, CUNY Law does every year. For the sake of our viewers and with the benefit of your experience, Laureen, what would you tell our viewers if they come up to you and one would ask you, how do you feel, what do you feel would be the best and effective tools to combat anti-Semitism and the lies that are spread out there?
Very simple. Use correct terminology. Anytime you want to say West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And it's difficult. It took me a good year to have that switch over, but it has to be done. If we're saying Palestinians, again, which of the 7 groups are we talking about? Gazans? Are we talking about Israeli Arab Christians that are not the same as Israeli Arab
You
Muslims?
remind me of the Emirates solution of Dr. Kedar.
Yes. He's been a great influence on me. And that's the thing, when we talk about Muslims, especially now with the Abraham Accords, we just had Saudi Arabia that did a Twitter campaign, official Twitter campaign, that pushed back on the fact that the Temple Mount is important to Islam. And they said, no, it's not. We have Mecca and Medina. The Jews have Jerusalem. The Jews have the Temple Mount. And then we had pro-Israel Muslims in Morocco that joined in that conversation. And so what I'm finding, one of my greatest influencers right now that I look up to, unfortunately, are not Jewish Zionists, but they are mostly Muslim Zionists who use correct terminology, who spread factual information to their networks. And I believe if anyone were to come up to me and say, how do I become a more effective Zionism educator, Zionism influencer, I would say to learn the history, at least to go back to the Ottoman times, because in 60 seconds, one can push back on the lies. Right. If we know that what happened between Ottoman times and present day, and the liberation of Israel. And that's also very important in terms of semantics. Yom Ha'atzmaut just happened, and so many people were saying happy birthday to Israel. But in reality, it's Independence Day, right? Israel was born thousands of years ago.
Right.
And it was Jews who freed Israel in 1948. Blood, sweat, tears, many lives were sacrificed. And it was not the UN that created Israel. No one gifted Israel to Jews. We, over decades, fought back hard against the British to free ourselves. So I think that's the most important.
So I think history, and also remember, like you're saying, that we have friends out there. You mentioned Absolutely. Muslim Zionists. Well, there are also, Christian Zionists, and among them Arab Christian Zionists, right?
Absolutely, right. And sometimes I do have that issue. Sometimes I do lump all Arabs together. And of course, there's Arab Christians. But yes, the Christian organizations are doing a great job. Kufi among one of them that I support. But to me,
we had Philos here a short while ago. They remind me of you because they're very much hands-on. So they like to be on the ground. They have what you call the Field Action League. Whenever something happens out there, their people come out in support. And we all know how rare that is for people, non-Jews, but sometimes even us within our community, who will come out and support in times of need, right?
Absolutely. And we have to support, of course, the Christians whose rights are being undermined in Arab countries as
Correct.
well. It's a two-way street, with our Christian friends. But I do have to say two things. So on one hand, it starts with us. I know so many times people look at Jews who, like myself, for nearly 20 years, was using incorrect terminology. Well, if a Jew says this, then that must be right. And we see that with Jewish celebrities. They spread lies. You have Jewish organizations, unfortunately, if not now, J Street, JVP. Sometimes they're even worse than our enemies. Like sometimes we think, who needs Hamas when we have JVP, when we have If Not Now?
Right.
And another thing we have to understand, that Jews are a minority in the world. Muslims, over 1.6 billion Muslims. So if we really want to move the needle forward in combating anti-Semitism, it's going to take massive cooperation with our pro-Israel Muslim friends.
Right.
And so the more that they're educated, the more effective this is going to be.
Laureen, before we conclude, I want to make sure that our viewers have a chance to interact. If anybody wants to learn more about history, about activism, about you, where should they go?
The best place would be the website, www.tbtnisrael.com. And that stands for Taking Back the Narrative, Israel.com. And it has everything. We have information broken down into subtopics. We have a lot of imagery from pre-liberation Israel. We have highlight boxes down on the bottom of the website. We have class information, everything for your Zionism education needs.
Zionism education. And if you thought that's not needed, that's mostly needed, especially today with the manifestation of anti-Semitism as anti-Zionism and the way we see this virus infiltrates, whether it's CUNY law or many other arenas, unfortunately, that try to subvert our narrative. Laureen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having this discussion with you and getting to know you.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was absolutely great. Thank you so much.
What a great pleasure just for us to sit here at JBS Studios in Times Square and to learn so much, not just about history, Zionism, and education, but mostly, my friends, about the passion that leads someone from A to B, that leads us all the way forward. And I hope that many people out there who sit frustratedly in front of the TV complaining about what they see around rise to the occasion and fight the good fight. If Laureen could do it from the environment she was in, you could do it as well. Not just on social media and in the living room, but out there in real life, in interactions, in changing hearts and minds. I'd like to thank all of you for watching and looking forward to seeing you next time as we cast yet another fascinating eye on Israel.